Hello there. At the fall of the Galactic Republic and the rise of the Galactic Empire, the very first thing that the Empire actually did was to create new starships and new starfighters for the Empire that were extremely cost effective, meaning that they were cheap to manufacture, cheap to produce, and they could create a crap ton of them while also making sure that they were highly equipped enough to be probably the best starfighters of the line for the entirety of the Empire. So today we are going to be talking about the four main TIE fighters of the TIE fighter line, that of course being the TIE fighter, the TIE bomber, the TIE interceptor, and the TIE defender, which correspond perfectly with the X-wing, the Y-wing, the A-wing, and the B-wing. So without further ado, here we go. But first, as always, we start with a little bit of a breakdown. At the end of the Republic's rule and at the beginning of the rise of the Empire, Palpatine wanted to do one thing, and that was to initially create a massive fleet of starfighters compared to many of the other starfighters throughout the entirety of the Republic. The Republic had many starfighters to begin with, that being the Z-95 Headhunters, the Y-Wings, the ARC-170 starfighters, and of course the V-Wings, all of which were extremely expensive to manufacture and wouldn't really subtly fit into the idea of the new empire, considering that Palpatine wanted to create an entire empire filled to the brim with millions of stormtroopers and pilots that would be taking over for the clones eventually. So the main idea was to effectively create an entire fleet of starfighters that were extremely cheap to manufacture, extremely cheap to maintain, and that had a simple design to the point where you could literally make millions of them for practically no cost as compared to all the other ships that I just recently mentioned. So Palpatine allowed many organizations to create their own personalized designs for their own ships, and the one that won out was Cinear Systems with their own idea of the TIE Fighter line, starting off with the TIE Fighter itself. The entirety of the TIE Fighter was basically as bare bones as you can imagine a ship being, and it really showed itself in how it was made. With two massive fins on the sides, a connecting jolt, and one cockpit right dead in the center, with two sides for the fins to connect to. The entirety of the ship basically had those fins, the connecting jolts, the cockpit, two ion engines, and a blaster up front with two mounted blasters to be able to fire in a straight line at whatever it was firing at. The TIE Fighter itself was so terrible that it literally lacked every substantial feature that every other ship in the Rebel Alliance had at that point. It didn't have a life support system, no hyperdrive to make quick escapes, no navigational systems, no anything. It literally had nothing that any of these other ships had. No consumables, no navigational computer, no life support system, no hyperdrive. The entire thing was basically a sitting duck if the Star Destroyer that was literally allowing it to travel through hyperspace decided to ditch them in a last-minute effort. And with all that being said, the TIE Bomber was just as bad as the TIE Fighter, but maybe slightly better, with a slightly better armament, a slightly better navigational system, and actual life support that only lasted for about 2 days. The TIE Bomber itself had laser cannons, proton torpedo launchers, and concussion missile launchers, and had a bombing chute that had thermal detonators, orbital mines, proton bombs, fusion bombs, and various other munitions to be able to take on and bombard whatever other target that it needed to destroy. But still, at the end of the day, just like the TIE Fighter, the TIE Bomber didn't have a hyperdrive system and it didn't have shielding. In fact, it was actually standardized without any of those features. And if you hit it once, it was destroyed. And if you tried to get out of there real quickly, you had to get to your Star Destroyer really fast, or else it would leave you in a massive battlefield. And of course, surprise, surprise, the TIE Interceptor didn't have any of those features either. No shielding, no hyperdrive, a navigational system to help them out, and a targeting system that helped them take out their targets a lot faster, with 4 wingtip blasters and 2 chin-mounted blasters on the actual ship itself, and with enough consumables to last 2 days and a life support system. With the only good thing about the TIE Interceptor being the fact that it was built to combat the A-Wing, and that the two of them would be the fastest ships on the battlefield, but still the TIE Interceptor didn't have any of the fancy features that many of the other ships of the Rebel Alliance had at the time. And that, of course, brings us to the actual best TIE Fighter of the entire line of starfighters throughout the entire history of the Empire, and that is, of course, the TIE Defender, with an actual hyperdrive, a power plant, shielding in the front and rear, titanium hull with quadranium steel solar panels, a navigation system, avionics system, 4 laser cannons, 2 ion cannons, 2 warhead launchers, and a tractor beam with a ejector seat, an actual life support system, with consumables lasting for well over a week. With really the only minor small detail being the fact that the ship is probably the most expensive ship in the entirety of the line when it comes to TIE fighters, and the ship itself was originally built and finished construction by the time of the Battle of Endor and wasn't seen during the battle. But with that being said, those are the TIE fighters of the line when it comes to the Galactic Empire. I will talk about the actual Star Destroyers later on down the line in another video. But until then, I'll see you guys later, and I hope you have a good day.